The air smelled like wood smoke and damp earth. Like endings. October in Maplewood always did. Emma stood on her new porch, watching amber leaves spiral down. Her hands wrapped tight around a cooling mug. The move here, after Mom passed, it was supposed to be a fresh start. It just felt empty. Like the spare room upstairs, still packed with boxes she couldn't face. She heard it. A rustle in the fallen maple leaves, deeper in the woods bordering her yard. Not the frantic scurry of a squirrel. Something slower, deliberate. She held her breath, strained her eyes against the gathering twilight mist. A shape emerged, silent, graceful as smoke. A cat. Not just any cat. A creature woven from the forest itself. Its fur was a tapestry of storm cloud gray and burnt orange, long and thick, catching the last low rays of sun like spun copper. Ears, tufted like a lynx, pricked forward. Eyes, an impossible, luminous green, fixed directly on her. They stopped, 10 feet from the porch steps, just watching. Not fearful, not demanding, simply present, as if it had been waiting for her to notice. Before we begin, if stories like this touch your heart, please like the video, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. It means a lot to us. Emma didn't move, didn't dare blink. The stillness of the creature was unnerving, complete. It seemed less like an animal and more like a piece of the deepening twilight given form. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant cry of a lone crow and the soft hiss of leaves skittering across the gravel drive. Hello. Her voice sounded too loud, too human, in the ancient quiet of the woods. The cat didn't startle, didn't flinch. One ear twitched, catching the sound. Its gaze, those profound green pools, never wavered from hers. There was an intelligence there, a depth that felt unsettling. It took a single step forward, not towards her, but parallel to the porch, keeping its distance. Emma noticed the way it moved. Not the slinking gait of a wary stray, but a confident, almost regal stride. Its paws were large, furred heavily between the toes, leaving deep, soft impressions in the damp leaf litter. A true forest cat. Then, it paused again, turned its head, looking not at her, but past her, towards the dark silhouette of her little house. Specifically, towards the large bay window, where the soft glow of her reading lamp spilled onto the overgrown lawn. A low sound rumbled from it. Not a purr, not quite. More like a hum, deep and resonant, vibrating in the cool air. A sound of recognition? Emma shivered, pulling her thin cardigan tighter. The chill wasn't just from the autumn air. It was the strangeness of it, the sheer deliberateness of this wild creature's appearance. On her first evening here, in this season of decay and mist, she remembered Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who'd sold her the house, mentioning something, offhand, while signing the papers. Place gets quiet in winter, except for the wind in the pines. Though some folks say, you might see a ghost cat come autumn. Silly old stories, mind you. Emma had dismissed it, just small-town folklore. Yet here it stood, solid, watching her house. The cat's gaze shifted back to her. It held her eyes for 3 long heartbeats, then turned and melted back into the thicket of birch and maple, its gray-orange fur blending instantly with the shadows and the falling leaves. Gone, as silently as it had arrived. Emma stood frozen on the porch, mug forgotten, cooling rapidly in her hands. The woods swallowed the cat completely. Only the swirling mist remained, tendrils curling where the magnificent creature had stood. The scent of damp earth and wood smoke felt heavier now, laden with something unnameable. She looked down at her own reflection, distorted in the dark surface of her tea. A woman alone, in a strange house, at the edge of unknown woods, hollowed out by grief, feeling utterly untethered. Why had it looked at the house like that? Why her porch? And that sound, that deep, resonant hum, it hadn't felt like a threat. It had felt like a question, or perhaps an acknowledgement. A single leaf, brilliant scarlet, drifted down and landed softly on the porch step where the cat had paused. Emma stared at it. The emptiness inside her, the vast, aching silence left by her mother, didn't feel quite so loud just then. Felt curious. She took a slow, shaky breath, the cold air sharp in her lungs. The woods were dark now. Silent. The ghost cat, if that's what it was, had vanished. But the imprint of its presence, those ancient, knowing eyes, lingered. Emma turned, finally, and opened the creaky screen door to go inside. She paused on the threshold, glancing back one more time at the wall of trees, now just a deeper shade of black against the twilight sky. Nothing moved. Yet, as she stepped into the warmth of the unfamiliar hallway, closing the door softly against the chill and the gathering fog, she felt it. A subtle shift, not in the world outside, but deep within her own quiet heart. The heavy curtain of her loneliness had been nudged just slightly aside. Something had begun. Something as fragile and as persistent as the first autumn leaf letting go. The next morning dawned crisp and silver, frost painting the grass in delicate feathers. Emma woke early, the unfamiliar silence of the old house pressing in. She made coffee, the ritual feeling hollow without her mother's voice chattering from the next room. The scent of brewing beans, usually comforting, now just underscored the quiet. She carried her mug to the bay window, the one the cat had looked towards. Pulling back the curtain, she scanned the tree line. Mist clung low to the ground, weaving between the trunks like spectral rivers. Nothing moved. No flash of gray-orange fur. No luminous green eyes. Of course not, she chided herself. It was just a cat. A stray. Probably miles away by now. But the memory of its presence, its impossible stillness, lingered. Like the imprint of warmth on a cold pillow. She spent the morning unpacking kitchen boxes, the clatter of plates and mugs too loud in the empty space. Her movements felt mechanical. Sorting spoons, stacking bowls, filling cabinets that smelled faintly of old wood and someone else's spices. Grief was a physical thing today. A heavy stone lodged just below her ribs, making every breath an effort. It had been 6 months since the hospice bed, the final whisper, the crushing silence after. Moving here, to this small town, to this house bordering the woods, it was supposed to be healing. So far, it just felt like exile. Around noon, needing air, she stepped onto the porch. The frost had burned off, leaving the world damp and gleaming. She breathed in the scent of decaying leaves, wet earth, distant wood smoke. And then a flicker of movement, deep in the dappled shadows beneath a massive oak. Emma froze, mug halfway to her lips. Perched on a moss-covered log, utterly still. The forest cat. It watched her, those ancient green eyes unblinking. Not wary, not friendly. Just observant. Emma didn't speak this time. She simply stood, letting the quiet settle. The cat seemed to appreciate that. After a long moment, it lowered its head, beginning a meticulous grooming session. Licking a massive, fluffy paw, then dragging it over one tufted ear. It was a gesture of profound normalcy, yet performed with an almost ritualistic grace. "Hey," Emma thought, "you're real. And you're back." The next day, she was ready. Not expecting, but hoping. She placed a small, shallow bowl of fresh water, and another, with a scoop of the expensive tuna-flavored kibble she'd bought on a whim yesterday, just inside the edge of the woods, where the porch steps met the wild. She retreated to the bay window, pretending to read a book, eyes constantly flicking towards the offering. Hours passed. Shadows lengthened. Doubt crept in. Stupid. It's a wild thing, probably hunting real food. Then, as the late afternoon sun slanted gold through the trees, the cat emerged, not from the deep woods, but from behind a thick rhododendron bush near the property line. Had it been watching her watch? It approached the bowls with infinite caution, nose twitching, testing the air. It circled twice, wide arcs, never taking its eyes off the house. Then, it stopped by the water, lowered its head, and drank, not lapping frantically, but in slow, deliberate pulls of its tongue. The sound, a soft, rhythmic lap, carried faintly to Emma on the porch where she now stood, holding her breath. It drank its fill, then turned its attention to the kibble. A delicate sniff. The pause. Not greedily, but steadily, methodically. Its powerful jaw working, the quiet crunch of the dry food surprisingly loud in the stillness. Emma felt a ridiculous surge of triumph. A tiny connection forged in tuna flavoring and fresh water. This became the rhythm. Every afternoon, around the same time, the cat would materialize from the woods or the shrubs. Emma would have fresh water and kibble waiting. She named him silently in her mind, Orion, for the hunter constellation her mother loved, and because he moved through the autumn woods like something celestial and untouchable. Orion was not a cuddler. He accepted the offerings, but maintained a careful distance. 5 feet, always 5 feet. If Emma shifted her weight, he'd freeze, one paw lifted, ready to melt back into the trees. If she spoke even softly, his ears would flatten slightly, though he rarely fled anymore. His trust was earned in millimeters. One day, after finishing his kibble, instead of immediately vanishing, he sat, right there on the damp leaves, facing the porch where Emma sat in her wicker chair. He began to groom again, the rasp of his tongue on thick fur, a surprisingly intimate sound. Emma stayed perfectly still, feeling an absurd warmth spread through her chest. This was companionship, quiet, undemanding, fragile. Another day, a cold rain swept in. Emma placed the bowls under the slight overhang of the porch roof, pushing them just beyond the reach of the downpour. Brian arrived, soaked, his magnificent fur plastered darkly to his frame, making him look smaller, younger. He shook himself vigorously, a spray of water droplets catching the gray light, then ate his kibble. Afterwards, instead of sitting in the rain, he paced, uncertain, along the very edge of the dry patch under the porch. Then, with a look that seemed almost apologetic, he lay down, not on the wet ground, but on the very bottom, dry, wooden step of Emma's porch. Curling his damp body into a compact circle, tucking his nose under his tail, he closed his eyes. Emma, inside watching through the screen door, felt tears prick unexpectedly. He trusted the shelter of her house. This wild forest ghost had chosen her step to rest. She began to learn his language. The slow blink, delivered while he sat watching her after a meal. She blinked back, slowly. "I see you. I mean no harm." the slight tilt of his head when she made a soft clicking sound with her tongue, the low, rumbling hum, almost below hearing, that seemed to vibrate from him when he was particularly content or perhaps contemplative. It wasn't a purr, not the rapid, happy thrum of a domestic cat. It was deeper, slower, more resonant, like the earth itself sighing. She started talking to him, softly, sitting on the top step while he occupied the bottom, telling him about the stubborn drawer in the kitchen, about the blue jay that scolded her from the feeder, about the boxes in the spare room, still untouched, about her mother. Her name was Eleanor, she whispered one afternoon, as Orion meticulously cleaned between his toes. The sun was low, painting the woods in fiery oranges and reds. She loved autumn best, said it felt honest. Everything laid bare. Her voice hitched. She'd have loved you, Orion. Called you her woodland prince. Orion paused his grooming, lifting his head. Those impossible green eyes met hers. Not judging, not pitying, just listening. He held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, slow, deliberate blink. Before resuming his task, it felt like absolution, a simple acknowledgement of her pain. From this silent creature of the mist, the connection deepened, woven from shared silence and small offerings. Emma found herself looking forward to the afternoons with a quiet fervor she hadn't felt in months. She bought better kibble, added a soft blanket to the bottom step, though Orion initially eyed it with suspicion, eventually deigning to place just his front paws on its edge. She noticed the small details, the faint scar notching one tufted ear, the way his fur caught the light, revealing hidden patterns of silver and rust, the surprising delicacy of his paws, despite their size, the absolute stillness he could hold, becoming part of the landscape itself. One chilly evening, she was sitting on the top step, wrapped in a thick sweater, hugging her knees. The grief felt particularly heavy, a crushing weight brought on by finding her mother's favorite scarf forgotten in a box. The scent of her perfume, faded but unmistakable, clinging to the wool. Tears slipped silently down Emma's cheeks. She didn't sob, just let them fall. Staring into the darkening woods, feeling utterly lost. Brian was there, having finished his meal. He'd been sitting on his blanket, watching the woods. He turned his head, slowly, sensing the shift in her silence. He saw the tears. Emma expected him to retreat. Animals often shied from human distress. But Orion didn't move. He watched her cry, his green eyes reflecting the last glimmer of twilight. Then deliberately, he rose from his blanket, not vanishing into the woods, but taking a single step, up onto the second porch step, closer than he'd ever voluntarily come. Emma held her breath. He took another step, onto the third step, now just an arm's length away on the steps below her. His gaze locked on hers, intense, unreadable. With infinite slowness, he stretched his long, powerful body, reaching one massive, furred paw onto the step where Emma sat, not touching her, but placing it deliberately, solidly, on the weathered wood, halfway between them. It was a gesture of profound significance, a crossing of an invisible boundary, an offering, not of touch, but of presence, of solidarity in the quiet, aching space of her grief. I'm here. You are not alone. Emma looked at that paw, the soft fur between the toes, the quiet strength in its placement, the heavy stone of grief beneath her ribs. Didn't vanish, but it shifted, just a fraction. making room for something else. Something warm, and fragile, and fiercely alive. The autumn mist began to curl around the porch posts, wrapping them in a soft, gray embrace. Orion didn't move his paw. He just watched her, his ancient, knowing eyes holding hers in the fading light, while the silent tears continued to fall. In that shared stillness, on the creaking steps of a house that was slowly becoming a home, a deeper bond was forged, not in words, but in the profound, wordless language of shared sorrow, and a single, unwavering paw, holding space in the gathering dark. The rhythm of their autumn days settled, like the fallen leaves forming soft carpets on the forest floor. Orion arrived with the slanting afternoon light, ate his kibble with deliberate grace, and lingered longer now, often sprawling on his blanket on the bottom step, or sitting sentinel, watching the woods with those fathomless green eyes. Emma's grief, while still a constant companion, had shifted shape. The crushing stone had fragmented, leaving pockets of space where something else could grow. Tiny shoots of peace. She'd even unpacked a few more boxes, including the one holding her mother's favorite teapot. Placing it on the kitchen windowsill felt like a small victory. But the spare room upstairs, the one directly above the bay window, remained untouched. The door stayed closed, a silent monument to the things she still couldn't face. Her mother's clothes, her journals, the fragile, everyday relics of a life ended. Just thinking about crossing that threshold made Emma's breath catch. Orion seemed attuned to this boundary. He'd explore the perimeter of the house, sniffing along the foundation, peering into the crawlspace vents, but he never approached the front door, and his gaze, when lifted towards the upper windows, always seemed to settle on the one with the drawn blinds. The spare room. Then, the humming began inside. It started subtly. Emma was washing dishes one evening. The window cracked open to let in the crisp air. A low, resonant vibration, almost like distant machinery, seemed to seep through the floorboards. She paused, sponge in hand, listening. It faded. She dismissed it as the old house settling, or the furnace kicking on somewhere deep in its belly. But it happened again the next night. And the next, always around twilight, when Orion was usually finishing his meal outside. A deep, rhythmic thrum, not loud, but pervasive. It seemed to originate, unmistakably, from beneath the closed door of the spare room. A cold prickle traced Emma's spine. Impossible. The room was empty. So, one evening, driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, she stood outside the spare room door, ear pressed to the cool wood. Silence. Then, as if sensing her presence, it began. A sustained, resonant vibration, deep enough to feel in her bones. Not mechanical, organic, alive. It was Orion's hum. The same sound he made deep in his chest, but amplified, coming from inside the locked room. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through her. Had he gotten in somehow? A broken window she hadn't noticed? But the windows were shut, locked, covered by blinds. She rattled the doorknob. Orion. Her voice was tight with fear. Orion, are you in there? The humming stopped instantly. Absolute silence rushed back in, thick and heavy. She fumbled for the key, hidden on the top ledge of the doorframe, hands shaking. Unlocked the door, pushed it open, heart hammering against her ribs. The room was exactly as she'd left it. Dim light filtered through the edges of the blinds. Towers of cardboard boxes, sealed with packing tape, loomed like silent monoliths in the gloom. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light escaping the blind. Empty. Still. No flash of gray-orange fur. No luminous green eyes watching her from the shadows. Only the faint scent of cardboard, dust, and the lingering ghost of her mother's lavender sachets. Emma sank to her knees just inside the doorway, breath coming in shallow gasps. The silence pressed in, accusing. Had she imagined it? Was grief and isolation finally conjuring sounds from the emptiness? The thought was terrifying. Downstairs, she heard the familiar soft crunch on the gravel path. She scrambled to her feet, rushed to the bay window, peering out. Orion was there, sitting calmly beside his empty water bowl, gazing up at the house. At her window, his fur was dry, unruffled. He couldn't have been inside. He'd been out here all along. The contradiction lodged in her mind, a splinter of the inexplicable. She refilled his bowls with trembling hands, watching him eat with a new wariness. He seemed ordinary, a large, beautiful forest cat enjoying a meal. But the humming aside, the next day, the pattern deepened, twisting into something stranger. Emma was in the living room, trying to read, her gaze constantly drifting towards the stairs. She heard it again. The humming, faint, resonant, emanating from the spare room. But this time, it wasn't sustained. It pulsed. A distinct rhythm, almost like a code, driven by a compulsion she couldn't name. Emma crept upstairs, stood outside the door. The pulsing hum vibrated through the wood. It felt deliberate, intentional. And then, something shifted inside the room. A sound beneath the hum. Faint, but unmistakable. Fresh. Scratch, scratch. Claws on wood. Emma's blood ran cold. Not just humming now. Scratching. From inside the sealed room. "Hello," she whispered, voice cracking. Silence. The humming and scratching ceased abruptly. She unlocked the door again, threw it open. Nothing. Just boxes, dust, silence. Frustration, sharp and hot, rose in her throat. This was madness. Was the house haunted? Was she, desperate for distraction? She decided to tackle the small attic access in the hallway ceiling. Maybe storing some boxes up there would make the spare room less oppressive. She pulled down the folding ladder, its rusty shriek startlingly loud in the quiet house. Dust rained down as she climbed into the dim, cramped space. It smelled of ancient insulation, dry rot, and forgotten things. The weak beam of her flashlight revealed, not empty space, but a few items tucked far back under the eaves. An old, dented suitcase, a bundle wrapped in yellowed newspaper, and, pushed deep into a shadowed corner, a small, intricately carved wooden box. Cedar, by the smell. Something about it tugged at her. She reached for it, ignoring the dust spiders skittered away. As she lifted it, surprisingly heavy, a floorboard creaked loudly below her. In the hallway, Emma froze. She wasn't alone. Carefully clutching the cedar box, she backed down the ladder, peered into the hallway. Empty. But the door to the spare room, the door she knew she had closed and locked after her last fruitless check, stood slightly ajar. The chill, deeper than any autumn wind, seeped into her bones. She approached the doorway slowly, cedar box held tightly against her chest like a shield. Orion sat just inside the threshold, on the dusty hardwood floor, amidst the looming towers of her mother's sealed boxes. He hadn't been there moments ago. The window was closed. No other entrance. He wasn't looking at her. His massive head was tilted upwards, those luminous green eyes fixed intently, not on the boxes, but on a single, small photograph, taped crookedly to the wall beside the doorframe. A photo Emma hadn't noticed before, or had deliberately ignored. It was her mother, Eleanor, taken years ago, right here, Emma realized with a jolt, standing on the porch of this very house, smiling broadly, arms wrapped around a much younger Emma, both of them squinting into the autumn sun. Behind them, just visible in the corner of the frame, blending into the fiery maple leaves, was a flash of gray-orange fur, and two unmistakable points of brilliant green. Orion looked from the photograph, slowly, deliberately, to Emma. His deep, resonant hum filled the room, no longer a mystery from behind a door, but a tangible vibration in the air between them. It wasn't a sound of menace, it was a sound of recognition, of memory, of a thread connecting past and present, tangled in grief, and anchored in this room. He held her gaze, the hum deepening, filling the space choked with unopened boxes and unbearable loss. Then he slowly, deliberately, lifted one massive paw, not towards her this time, but towards the photograph on the wall, towards the image of Eleanor, and the ghost of a forest cat in the autumn leaves behind her. The silent question hung in the dust-moted air, heavier than any box, sharper than any claw mark. Why are you keeping her locked away? Emma stared at the cat, at the photograph, at the cedar box in her arms that suddenly felt like it held the weight of the world, or perhaps just the weight of a heart unwilling to break fully open. The comfortable rhythm of their autumn, the fragile piece she'd built, shattered, replaced by a rising tide of bewildering tension, and the terrifying, hum-filled silence of a door finally, irrevocably, opened. The silence in the spare room wasn't empty anymore. It was thick, charged, vibrating with the low resonance of Orion's hum, and the deafening echo of his unspoken question. Why are you keeping her locked away? Emma stood frozen in the doorway, the carved cedar box heavy against her pounding heart. Dust motes danced in the shaft of weak light slicing through the blinds, illuminating Orion's unwavering form, his paw still lifted, not towards her, but towards the photograph, towards her mother's smiling face, and the ghost of himself in the autumn leaves behind her. The air felt thin, sucked out by the weight of revelation. This wild creature, this forest phantom, wasn't just visiting her. He had known Eleanor. He had belonged to this place, this porch, this autumn ritual, long before Emma arrived, carrying her grief like an unopened suitcase. The humming deepened, a tangible vibration in the floorboards, in Emma's own bones. It wasn't menacing. It was expectant, an invitation, or a demand. Her gaze dropped from the photograph, sweeping over the towers of sealed boxes. Her mother's life, packed away in cardboard and tape. A life Emma had been too afraid to touch, too raw to remember, too guilty to release. What if opening them made the loss real? What if the scent of her perfume finally broke me? If I forget the sound of her laugh? The fear had been a cage, and she'd locked herself inside, throwing away the key. Orion's green eyes, luminous in the gloom, never left hers. His paw lowered back to the dusty floorboards, but the question remained, hanging heavier than the dust in the air. A sob, ragged and unexpected, tore from Emma's throat. Not just grief this time. Shame. Guilt so profound it buckled her knees. She stumbled forward, not towards the cat, but towards the nearest stack of boxes. Her mother's handwriting stared back at her from the labels. Familiar loops and slants. Eleanor winter sweaters. Kitchen good dishes. Photos and albums fragile. The cedar box slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Orion flinched minutely, but didn't retreat. He watched, his hum a constant, grounding thrum in the background. As Emma sank to her knees before the tower labeled Eleanor Personal. Her hands shook violently as she fumbled for the tape. No knife. No scissors. Just desperate fingers, ripping the brown packing tape away. The sound was obscenely loud, a violation of the silence she'd imposed. The cardboard flaps fell open. The scent hit her first. Lavender roses, her mother's sachets. But beneath it, the faint, unmistakable trace of Eleanor's favorite gardenia perfume. And something else. Emma choked, pressing the back of her hand to her mouth. The grief surged, a tidal wave threatening to drown her. She almost slammed the flaps shut again. Almost ran. A soft pressure against her leg. Solid. Orion. He had moved silently across the dusty floor. He wasn't looking at the box. He was looking at her. His massive head tilted, those ancient green eyes holding hers, filled with a quiet intensity that wasn't pity, but understanding. Deep, profound, wordless understanding. He pressed his flank firmly against her trembling thigh, a silent anchor in the storm of her unraveling. His hum vibrated through her, a resonant purr, deeper and more complex than ever before. Steady, unwavering. Emma took a shuddering breath, the scent of gardenia and lavender wrapping around her, mingling with the warm, wild scent of Orion's fur. She reached into the box. Her fingers brushed softwool. A familiar cable-knit cardigan, moss green, her mother's favorite for cool autumn days. Beneath it, a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. And beneath those, a small, cloth-bound book. Her mother's journal. Tears blurred her vision. Hot and relentless. She pulled out the cardigan, hugging it to her face, inhaling the ghost of her mother, the scent unlocking a floodgate of memories. Sunday mornings with pancakes, quiet evenings reading by the fire, her mother's hands, warm and capable, smoothing her hair when she was sick. She wept, great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Grief, long dammed up, finally broke free, raging through her, scouring her hollow. She buried her face in the soft wool, the world dissolving into sound and scent and unbearable loss. Orion never moved. His solid warmth remained pressed against her. His deep hum, that resonant vibration, was the only constant, a lifeline in the drowning darkness. He didn't try to comfort her with touch, beyond that steady pressure against her leg. Present, witnessing, holding space for the tsunami of sorrow she'd kept locked away. Just like this room. Slowly, the violent sobs subsided, leaving her spent, trembling, eyes swollen, throat raw. She still clutched the cardigan, damp with her tears. Her gaze fell on the cedar box she'd dropped. It had landed on its side, the intricately carved lid slightly askew. Something gleamed dully within. With trembling hands, wiping her face with the sleeve of her own sweater, Emma reached for it. Brian shifted, his head lowering, his nose twitching towards the box. A low, inquisitive murmur rumbling in his chest. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in folds of faded blue velvet, lay a collection of small objects. A smooth, river-polished stone, striped gray and white. A single, dried crimson maple leaf, perfectly preserved. A tarnished silver locket, its tiny clasp broken. And, folded neatly beneath them, a single sheet of thick, cream-colored stationery. Her mother's handwriting, familiar and dear, covered the page. Emma's breath hitched. She recognized the date scrawled at the top. October 12th, just weeks before her mother got the diagnosis. The final autumn. She unfolded the paper, hands shaking so badly the words blurred. Orion nudged her gently with his head, a soft, grounding pressure. She took a deep, shuddering breath, steadied herself, and began to read. My dearest Emma, autumn has truly settled in the woods behind the old house now. The maples are on fire, and the air smells like wood smoke and endings. It's my favorite time. Always has been. There's a clarity to it, a stripping down to the bones of things. It makes you see what's real. I've been thinking a lot about time lately. About the paths we walk, and the ones we leave behind. This house, these woods, they hold so many echoes. Especially now. Especially in autumn. You remember my stories about the forest cat? The big, beautiful phantom with eyes like moss agate? Orion, you used to say he was my autumn ghost. Well, he's back. Came just as the first frost touched the grass. Same as always. Sitting on that mossy log, watching the house. Waiting. He's older now. I see it around his eyes. A little slower. That scar on his ear looks whiter against his winter-thick fur. But his presence, oh Em, it's the same. Steady, silent, utterly certain. He reminds me of the constancy of wild things. Of the cycles that turn regardless of our human worries. He arrives with the falling leaves and vanishes with the deep snows. The promise kept year after year. Seeing him this time, it stirred something in me. A deep gratitude for his quiet companionship through so many seasons of my life here. He never asked for anything but a bowl of water and the space to just be. Yet he gave me so much. A reminder that I wasn't truly alone out here. A connection to something older, wilder, wiser than myself. A mirror, perhaps, to the quiet parts of my own soul that loved the solitude of these woods. And it's made me think of you, my darling girl. My constant. My wild, bright spirit. You're out there building your own life, your own path. And I am so fiercely proud of the woman you've become. But I know, I've always known, that my choices, my love for this quiet, solitary place, meant you carried a different kind of weight. The weight of distance. The weight of a mother whose heart belonged as much to the trees as it did to her child. I see that now, more clearly than ever in this autumn light. I don't regret loving this place, or Orion's fleeting visits. They shape me. But I regret, deeply, any loneliness you felt because of it. Any sense that you weren't the absolute center of my universe. Because you were. You are. Even when the woods called, or Orion watched from the shadows, you were the brightest thing in my world. This house, it's just wood and stone. These woods, just trees and earth. Orion, a beautiful, wild mystery passing through. But you, Emma, you are my heart walking around outside my body. My true constant. My deepest, most enduring love. If you're reading this, well, then autumn has come around again without me. And Orion has likely found his way to your porch. Don't be afraid of his silence or his wildness. He's a keeper of thresholds. Think, between seasons, between worlds, between grief and memory. Let him sit with you. Let the quiet sink in. And know, absolutely know, that my love for you is as constant as his autumn return, as enduring as these old trees, as vast and deep as the woods themselves. I love you always, through every season, beyond every ending. Mom, the final words blurred, drowned in the fresh wave of tears that spilled silently down Emma's cheeks. Not the wrenching sobs of before, but a deep, aching release. The words washed over her, through her, filling the hollows carved by grief with a bittersweet, radiant warmth. The guilt, the fear of forgetting, the crushing weight of unspoken words. It didn't vanish, but it transformed, dissolving in the pure, undiluted truth of her mother's love. A love that saw her, acknowledged the complexity, chose her, unequivocally, above the woods, above the solitude, above even the enigmatic forest cat. A soft noise beside her, Orion had lowered his massive head, his nose gently nudging the edge of the letter in her hands. He sniffed the paper, the scent of her mother's ink, her perfume lingering on the stationery. He looked up at Emma. His luminous green eyes no longer held ancient mystery, but a profound, gentle knowing. As if he recognized the words, as if he understood the gift that had just been delivered. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his head and pressed his broad, furry forehead against Emma's tear-stained cheek. It was the first time he had ever truly touched her. The contact was electric. Warmth, solidity, a deep, resonant vibration emanating from his chest. Not just a hum, but a full deep purr. The sound of a mountain settling, of roots reaching deep into the earth. It vibrated through her skull, filling her with a sense of peace so profound it stole her breath. It was comfort. It was blessing. It was a silent transmission of shared memory, a bridge between her mother's love and her own breaking open heart. In that dusty room, surrounded by opened boxes and the tangible ghosts of the past, kneeling on the floor with a wild forest cat's forehead pressed to her cheek, and her mother's words clutched in her hand, Emma didn't find an end to her grief. She found its true beginning, not as a crushing stone, but as a deep, wide river, flowing from a source of pure, enduring love. And sitting quietly beside her, purring like the earth itself, was the keeper of the threshold, guiding her across. The autumn light through the blinds painted stripes of gold on the dusty floorboards, on the open boxes, on the gray-orange fur pressed against her skin. The hum inside the house, the hum that had started it all, was no longer a mystery. It was the sound of a heart, wild and ancient, recognizing its own. And finally, coming home, the heavy, dust-filled air of the spare room still vibrated with the echo of Emma's sobs and the profound resonance of Orion's purr, pressed warm against her tear-stained cheek. Slowly, gently, he withdrew. His luminous green eyes held hers for a long, silent moment, filled with a depth of understanding that felt older than the woods themselves. Then, with a soft sigh that ruffled the fur on his chest, padded silently across the dusty floorboards, past the open box spilling her mother's cardigan and letters, past the cedar box lying on its side, and slipped through the slightly ajar door, vanishing down the dim hallway. Emma remained kneeling, the letter clutched in her trembling hand. Her mother's words, "My true constant, my deepest, most enduring love," pulsed within her, a warm, living counterpoint to the hollow ache that had defined her for months. The grief hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed state. From a crushing, frozen stone to a deep, flowing river, carrying memories, love, and the sharp, sweet ache of absence. It was a pain she could breathe with now. Sunlight, weak but persistent, struggled through the gaps in the blinds, painting stripes of gold across the chaos of open boxes. The discarded packing tape, the precious artifacts of her mother's life, now laid bare. The room didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where the past could finally breathe. Emma carefully folded the letter, tucking it into the pocket of her jeans, a tangible warmth against her thigh. She picked up the cedar box, brushing dust from its intricate carvings, and placed the river stone, the dried maple leaf, the broken locket, back inside on their velvet bed. They weren't just objects now. They were touchstones. She closed the lid, not to hide them away, but to keep them safe. Then, she turned back to the open box. Her mother's moss-green cardigan, damp with tears, lay in her lap. Instead of folding it away, Emma lifted it, shrugged it on over her own sweater. It was too big, swamping her frame, the sleeves falling past her fingertips. The scent of gardenia and lavender, and something uniquely Eleanor, wrapped around her like an embrace. A fragile smile touched her lips. The work began. Not the frantic tearing of before, but a slow, deliberate, almost sacred unpacking. Box by box, item by item. She started with the sweaters, folding them neatly, not into storage bins, but into the empty drawers of the spare room dresser. Her mother's presence deserved space, not confinement. She hung the dresses she remembered, the floral prints, the sensible woolens, in the closet, pushing aside the shadows. The clinking of her mother's good dishes, being carefully arranged on the spare room shelves, was a sound of homecoming. Orion became her quiet companion in this ritual. He no longer waited solely for his afternoon meal on the porch. He'd appear in the doorway of the spare room, silent as smoke, watching her work with those fathomless green eyes. Sometimes, he'd curl up on the old braided rug she'd unearthed, tucked into a patch of sunlight, his deep, resonant hum a soft undercurrent to the rustle of tissue paper, the sigh of opening boxes. Other times, he'd simply sit, gazing at a particular photograph she'd placed on the newly cleared nightstand, or sniffing curiously at a familiar woolen scarf. The rigid 5-foot rule dissolved. He'd brush past her legs as she sorted books, his thick fur whispering against her jeans. He'd jump onto the dresser, settling regally amidst the stacks of folded sweaters, watching her unpack with an air of quiet approval. Once, while she was carefully arranging her mother's collection of porcelain birds on a shelf, he stretched, deliberately placing one massive paw on her shoulder. The weight worm found it. For just a moment, a silent, well done. The humming inside the house, the mysterious resonance that had emanated from this room, never returned. Its purpose, it seemed, had been served. The truth was out. The door was open. Emma began talking to her mother again, not in frantic, grief-stricken whispers, but in soft, conversational tones. As she handled her things, "Remember this hideous vase, Mom? Aunt Marge gave it to you. You called it arrestingly ugly, but you kept it on the mantel anyway." She placed it on the windowsill, catching the afternoon light. "Found your secret chocolate stash, behind the gardening manuals. Predictable." She smiled, popping a slightly stale butterscotch candy into her mouth. "And this, your ridiculous floppy sun hat? You looked like a mushroom, but you loved it." She perched it on a hook behind the door. The conversations weren't one-sided. Memories answered her. The sound of her mother's laugh, suddenly clear, bubbled up when she found the ridiculous novelty salt and pepper shakers shaped like squirrels. The feel of her mother's hand, warm and reassuring, seemed to settle on her own as she traced the faded embroidery on a tablecloth. The grief was still there, a tender ache, but woven through it now was gratitude and a dawning sense of peace. Autumn deepened. The fiery reds and oranges of the maples gave way to bare, skeletal branches clawing at a grayer sky. Frost became a nightly visitor, painting the grass in intricate, silver patterns each dawn. The air grew sharper, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and the distant promise of snow. Emma noticed the change in Orion. His visits grew longer, but his movements were slower, more deliberate. He spent more time basking in the thin sunlight on the porch, or curled on the braided rug in the spare room, now simply Eleanor's room. He ate his kibble with the same steady focus, but afterwards, instead of vigilant watching, he often seemed contemplative. His deep green eyes would gaze out at the woods, not with the alertness of a hunter, but with the quiet acceptance of one preparing for a journey. One crisp afternoon, the sky the color of faded denim, Emma sat on the bottom porch step, her mother's cardigan wrapped tightly around her. Orion finished his meal, lapped some water, then didn't retreat to his blanket or the woods. He walked slowly, purposefully, up the steps, past his usual spot, and settled himself right beside her on the step, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his thick fur and hear the deep, slow rhythm of his breathing. They sat in silence, watching the mist begin to gather, coiling like ghostly serpents around the bases of the trees. The woods were quieter now, the frantic chatter of squirrels replaced by the lonely cry of a jay, the whisper of the wind through bare branches. Emma reached out, slowly, giving him every chance to move away. Her fingers brushed the dense, soft fur between his ears. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He tilted his head, minutely, into the touch. A soft, rumbling purr, deeper and more resonant than any she'd heard before, vibrated through his frame and into her hand. It wasn't the purr of a domestic cat seeking affection. It felt ancient, acknowledging, a benediction. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the cooling air. Autumn was ending. His time here, his vigil, was drawing to a close. The deep snows were coming. The keeper of the threshold was preparing to cross back. She didn't ask him to stay. She understood, the rhythm he was bound to, the wildness that was his essence. Her mother's words echoed. He arrives with the falling leaves and vanishes with the deep snows. A promise kept year after year. His presence had been a gift, a bridge across her own frozen river of grief. To ask for more would be to diminish the profound beauty of the promise fulfilled. They sat together, human and forest cat, as the mist thickened, swirling around the porch steps, muting the colors of the dying world. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the warmth of Orion's purr, the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, the comforting weight of her mother's cardigan, and the deep, quiet certainty that love, true love, endured. It didn't erase the endings. It simply wove them into the fabric of what remained. A fabric that, thanks to a ghost cat and an open door, felt strong enough, warm enough, to face the coming winter. The first flake of snow, small, tentative, drifted down from the leaden sky, melting instantly on the warm wood of the porch step, between Emma's foot and Orion's massive, furred paw. The first snowflake melted. A tiny, cold kiss on the worn wood of the porch step. A silent herald. Orion felt it too. His deep, resonant purr, a comforting vibration against Emma's side. So he lifted his massive head, those luminous green eyes, no longer fixed on the mist-shrouded woods, but turned towards her. In their depths, she saw no fear of the coming cold, only a profound, ancient acceptance. And something else, a softness, a farewell held in the curve of his gaze. He didn't startle, didn't tense, simply slowly rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, carrying the weight of seasons in his step. He stretched a long, luxurious arch of his powerful spine, tufted ears twitching, catching the whisper of wind shifting through bare branches. He turned, not towards the deep woods he usually vanished into, but towards Emma. He took a single step closer, close enough that she could see the intricate patterns in his gray-orange fur, the faint white scar notching his ear, the flecks of gold within the deep green of his eyes. He lowered his head and nudged her hand, still resting on her knee, with the broad velvet softness of his forehead. Just once, firmly, a touch that vibrated with the echo of his purr and carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Thank you. Be well. Remember. Before she could react, before she could lift her hand to bury it in his thick ruff, he stepped back, turned, and walked, not ran, down the porch steps. His large, furred paws made no sound on the damp gravel path. He didn't look back. He walked with the same regal certainty he'd arrived with, straight towards the wall of trees, now spectral sentinels in the thickening mist. Emma watched, her breath catching in her throat, her mother's cardigan pulled tight against the sudden, deeper chill. Orion reached the edge of the woods, where the manicured lawns surrendered to wild ferns and fallen branches. For just a heartbeat, a silhouette of wild grace against the swirling gray. Then he stepped into the mist, not vanishing instantly, but becoming part of it, his gray-orange fur blending, dissolving, until he was simply gone, absorbed by the autumn fog, as silently and completely as he'd first appeared. The silence that followed was immense, not empty, but full of the echo of his presence, the warmth of his purr still lingering in her bones, the imprint of his forehead against her hand. The first true snowflakes began to fall, covering the gravel path where his paws had last touched the earth. Emma sat there for a long time, watching the snow dust the woods, watching the mist coil and shift where Orion had crossed the threshold. The grief for her mother, now a familiar river flowing through her, was joined by a new, quieter ache, not sharp, but deep, a space where wildness and silent understanding had resided. She touched her cheek, where his forehead had pressed in Eleanor's room. A final blessing. The next morning dawned white, a thin, pristine blanket covering the world. Emma stood at the bay window, her mother's cardigan warm around her, a mug of steaming tea cradled in her hands. The woods were transformed, skeletal branches etched in white, the mist burned away by a weak, pale sun. Beautiful, desolate, quiet in a way that felt complete. Orion's bowls, still sitting just beyond the porch steps, were half buried in snow. She wouldn't move them. Not yet. They were a marker, a promise. The work inside continued, but the energy had shifted. Eleanor's room wasn't just unpacked. It was lived in. Emma sat in the old armchair she'd unearthed, reading her mother's journals by the weak winter light filtering through the blinds. The words weren't just memories now. They were conversations. She'd laugh at her mother's sharp observations about the nosy postman, sigh over her descriptions of failed rose bushes, tear up at the simple entries about missing Emma, wish Emma could see the frost patterns this morning, like lace on the window pane. She always loved them. One afternoon, restless, drawn by the memory of a path, Emma bundled up, thick boots, scarf wrapped high, her mother's ridiculous floppy hat perched atop her head. She stepped out into the crisp, snow-scented air, not onto the porch, but towards the woods, towards the spot where Orion had vanished into the mist. The snow crunched under her boots, a satisfying, rhythmic sound. She pushed past the low-hanging, snow-laden branches of the rhododendron, entering the deeper quiet beneath the trees. The world hushed. Sunlight filtered weakly through the canopy, dappling the pristine snow. She followed no path, but her feet seemed to know the way Orion had taken. Past the massive oak where she'd first seen him perched, past the moss-covered log, now frosted white, deeper where the trees grew closer, older. She stopped in a small clearing, ringed by ancient hemlocks, their branches heavy with snow. The air was still, sacred. This felt like his place, a hidden heart within the woods. Her gaze swept the snow-covered ground and caught on a splash of unexpected color, not vibrant, but distinct against the white. Tucked at the base of the largest hemlock, partially sheltered by its gnarled roots, lay 3 objects, not placed, but left. A gift, or a final message. Emma knelt, brushing snow gently aside. First, a single, perfect feather. Sleek, barred in soft shades of gray and charcoal. An owl's feather, symbol of wisdom, intuition, seeing through darkness. Beside it, a small stone, not river-polished like the one in the cedar box, but rough, volcanic, dark as basalt, warm to the touch, even in the cold, holding an inner fire, strength, resilience, grounding, and finally, tucked beside the stone, a sprig of evergreen, not pine or spruce, but yew. Its dark green needles sharp, resilient, bearing a single, bright red berry. Ancient symbol of death and rebirth, guardian of thresholds, eternal life. Emma gathered them carefully, holding them in her gloved hand. The feather, the warm stone, the yew sprig with its defiant berry. Not random forest debris. Chosen, left for her. Orion's final gift. A silent language of symbols, whispering the truths he'd embodied. Wisdom in the silent watching. Strength in the enduring presence. The eternal cycle, death making space for rebirth. And the fierce, resilient life that persisted even in the deepest winter. Tears welled, hot against the cold air. But they were different now. Not the tears of shattering grief, but of profound, humbling gratitude. He hadn't just helped her unlock her mother's room. He'd helped her unlock her own heart, shown her that love wasn't erased by endings, but transformed, woven into the fabric of what came next. She placed the feather, the stone, the yew sprig, into the pocket of her mother's cardigan, right beside Eleanor's folded letter. A small, precious collection of talismans, touchstones for the quiet moments. Walking back through the hushed woods, the snow sparkling under the pale sun, Emma didn't feel Orion's absence as a void. She felt it as a presence that had shifted form. No longer a magnificent cat gracing her porch, but a quiet knowing settled deep within her bones. A wild peace. A few days later, driving into town for groceries. She passed the weathered sign she'd seen 100 times, but never truly seen. Maplewood Animal Shelter, volunteers needed. Before the thought would have tightened her chest. Too much potential for new loss. Too raw. Now, she pulled into the parking lot. The small brick building looked warm, despite the gray day. She walked in, the scent of disinfectant and fur greeting her, along with the hopeful barks and curious meows from kennels down the hall. A woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Marge looked up from a desk. "Can I help you, dear?" Emma took a breath, her hand instinctively touching the pocket holding the feather, the stone, the letter. I'd like to volunteer, if you still need help." Marge's smile widened. "Always. What kind of critters do you like?" "Cats," Emma said softly. I have some experience with a rather unique one." Marge led her back, past the cheerful chaos of the dog kennels, to the quieter cat room. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating rows of cages and cozy climbing structures. Cats of all shapes and colors lounged, played, watched with wary or curious eyes. Emma's gaze swept the room and stopped, tucked in the farthest corner cage. Not hiding, but sitting very still, watching her with wide, intelligent eyes, was a cat unlike the others. Not a forest giant like Orion, but a small, delicate thing. Her fur was a muted tapestry of tortoiseshell, patches of smoky gray, burnt orange, and black, like autumn leaves muted by frost. One ear was slightly crumpled, hinting at a past hardship. But her eyes, they weren't green, but a striking, luminous amber. And they held Emma's with an unnerving stillness, a quiet intensity that felt familiar. Emma approached slowly, kneeling before the cage. The little tortoiseshell didn't retreat, didn't meow. She simply thushed. "Ah, that's Ember," Marge said gently. "Came in a month ago. Half-starved, scared stiff, still figuring us out. Doesn't trust easy, this one." Emma reached a finger slowly through the bars. "Not to touch. Just an offering." Ember stretched her neck forward, tentatively, and sniffed, delicate whiskers brushing Emma's fingertip. Holding Emma's amber gaze with her own, the little cat, slowly, deliberately, blinked. A single, slow, deliberate blink. "I see you. I mean no harm." The echo was so profound, so utterly unexpected, it stole Emma's breath. Not Orion, but a tiny ember, a spark of that same wild wisdom, that same silent language, waiting patiently in the corner of a shelter, for someone who understood the power of a slow blink, and the courage it takes to trust again after winter. Emma's hand, still outstretched, didn't tremble. She blinked back, slowly. "I see you too." She didn't rush, didn't declare she'd take Ember home that instant. The connection was a seed, needing time, sunlight, gentle care. Just like the one that had grown with Orion, step by fragile step. But as she filled out the volunteer forms, her gaze kept drifting back to the small tortoiseshell cat, now curled in a tight ball. One amber eye cracked open, watching her still. The feather, the stone, the yew-berry seemed to pulse warm in her pocket. Beside her mother's letter, Orion's final gift hadn't just been objects left in the snow, or even the profound peace he'd helped her find. It was the quiet courage to open her heart again, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it, to tend a new ember, trusting that even the smallest spark held within it the memory of the forest fire and the promise of warmth yet to come. The keeper of thresholds, it seemed, had shown her the way, not just through grief, but back towards life. The first deep snows settled over Maplewood, muffling the world in a thick, silent blanket. Emma's world, once defined by the rhythm of Orion's afternoon arrivals, found a new cadence. 3 mornings a week, she drove the familiar road into town, her mother's moss-green cardigan a constant warmth beneath her winter coat. The pocket, holding the owl feather, the warm stone, the yew sprig, and Eleanor's letter, seemed to hum with quiet reassurance. The Maplewood Animal Shelter, once a place she'd hurried past, became a sanctuary of a different kind. Her volunteer shift started with practical tasks, scrubbing litter boxes until they gleamed, filling water bowls to the brim, measuring precise scoops of kibble, the scent familiar, grounding. But the heart of it was the cats. She learned their names, their quirks. Old Tom, who demanded chin scritches with a raspy meow. Playful Luna, a whirlwind of black fur chasing feather toys. Shy Bella, who hid until Emma sat perfectly still, letting trust bloom at its own pace. And Ember, Ember, the small tortoiseshell cat, with her muted autumn fur and luminous amber eyes, remained in her corner cage, not cowering, but observing, a quiet sentinel. Emma didn't force it. She'd sit nearby, reading aloud from a book, her voice soft, steady, or simply sit in companionable silence, working on a crossword puzzle, letting Ember grow accustomed to her presence, her scent, the rhythm of her breath. She'd talk, not just to Ember, but to all of them, telling them about the stubborn ice on her windshield that morning, about the blue jay that stole suet from the feeder, about the funny passage she'd found in her mother's journal. Tried a new recipe for beetroot soup. Looks disturbingly like something from a horror film. Tastes surprisingly good. Note to self, don't serve to guests. She'd laugh, and sometimes she'd swear old Tom chuffed in response. With Ember, the progress was measured in millimeters, but each one felt monumental. The day Ember stopped pressing herself against the back wall when Emma approached. The day she crept forward, just an inch, to sniff the back of Emma's hand through the bars. The day her tiny pink nose, cold and damp, actually brushed Emma's fingertip. And always, the slow blinks. Emma would catch Ember's amber gaze, hold it, and blink slowly. I see you. I mean no harm. Ember would watch, processing, and sometimes, after a long pause, she'd blink back. I see you too. It wasn't Orion's ancient knowing, but a fragile, hard-won trust, being built brick by tiny brick. A different kind of wildness, tempered by fear, learning to believe in safety. Back at the house, Eleanor's room, now simply Mom's room, felt truly alive. Emma spent evenings there, curled in the old armchair, a reading lamp casting a warm pool of light. She'd read her mother's journals, not with tears, but with a smile, or a soft sigh of recognition. She'd write her own thoughts, in a new notebook, filling pages with observations about the winter woods, shelter stories, and the slow, patient dance with Ember. One frigid afternoon, snow falling steadily outside the bay window, Emma was sorting through a final box of her mother's books. Tucked between a worn gardening guide and a collection of poetry, she found a small, flat packet, wrapped in tissue paper. Inside, a simple wooden picture frame, and within it, a photograph Emma had never seen. It was Eleanor, much younger, standing not on the porch, but deep in the autumn woods, bathed in golden light filtering through fiery maple leaves. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking down, a look of such tender awe on her face. It took Emma's breath away. Cradled in her arms, small enough that Eleanor's hands supported him fully, was a kitten, a tiny ball of fluff, for a chaotic mix of storm cloud gray and burnt orange. Eyes wide, impossibly green, even in the faded photo. Staring up at Eleanor with utter trust. Brian, not the majestic forest phantom, but a vulnerable foundling. The scar on his ear, just a faint pink line then, telling a story of hardship overcome. Emma traced the image, her throat tight. The story shifted, deepened. He hadn't just been a wild visitor. He'd been hers. Rescued? Found? The details were lost, but the bond, captured in that single, unguarded moment, was undeniable. Holding this tiny piece of wildness, looking at him as if he held the secrets of the universe, and the kitten gazing back, with eyes that already held the depth of ancient woods. The mystery of the humming, the scratching, the sense of him knowing the house. It all crystallized. He wasn't just visiting his old territory. He was returning to the place where his deepest bond began, to the human who had first shown him kindness. And when that human was gone, he'd waited, guarded her memory, and ultimately, guided her daughter back to her. The tears came then, not just for her mother, but for the magnificent, loyal creature who had bridged the gap between loss and love. He had been Eleanor's secret, her woodland prince, long before he became Emma's guide through grief. She placed the framed photo on the nightstand in Mom's room, beside the porcelain birds and the silly squirrel salt shakers. A new centerpiece, a testament to a love that had spanned species, seasons, and even death. Weeks turned. The snowdrifts grew high, then slowly began to shrink, revealing the frozen earth beneath. The days grew imperceptibly longer, the sunlight holding a hint of warmth it hadn't possessed in December. At the shelter, a breakthrough. Emma opened Ember's cage door, as she did every shift, offering the choice. Usually, Ember stayed put, or ventured only a few inches onto the top of the nearby cat tree, retreating quickly if anyone moved too suddenly. This day, Emma sat on the floor, her back against the wall, reading softly. She felt, rather than saw, the movement, a delicate weight, barely there, landing softly on the blanket beside her thigh. She didn't look up immediately, kept her voice steady, reading a passage about migrating birds. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the muted tortoiseshell fur, the crumpled ear. Ember sat, not touching her, but close, very close. Her small body was tense, ready to bolt, but she held her ground. Her luminous amber eyes, fixed not on Emma, but on the middle distance, absorbing the sound of her voice. Emma slowly, lowered the book to her lap. She didn't reach out. She simply turned her head, meeting Ember's gaze. The little cat flinched minutely, but held. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Emma smiled, the gentlest curve of her lips. Holding Ember's wide amber eyes. She blinked. Slowly, deliberately. I see you. You are safe. Seconds stretched. The shelter sounds faded, the barks, the meows, the clatter from the front desk. Ember stared, processing. The fear, the ingrained wariness, warring with the dawning realization of safety. A miracle. Ember blinked back. Slowly, deliberately. Her tiny body seemed to release a fraction of its tension. She didn't purr, didn't move closer, but she stayed, sitting beside Emma on the blanket, accepting her presence, not as a threat, but as part of her landscape. A tentative ember catching hold. Walking back to her car later, the late winter air still biting, Emma felt a different kind of warmth spreading through her. Not the fierce, purring resonance Orion had gifted her, but a quieter, equally profound glow. The warmth of nurturing a spark, of participating in the slow, patient unfurling of trust. She drove home, past the skeletal trees holding the promise of buds, past the shrinking snowbanks revealing patches of stubborn, frozen grass. She entered the quiet house, hanging her coat, the familiar scent of wood polish and faint lavender welcoming her. She didn't go straight to the kitchen or to the living room. She walked upstairs, into Mom's room. Sunlit, stronger now, streamed through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing around Eleanor's things. Emma stood before the nightstand, looking at the new photograph. Vibrant, holding tiny Orion, both gazing at each other with a love that transcended words. Her fingers brushed the smooth wood of the frame, then dipped into her cardigan pocket. She drew out the keepsakes, the owl feather, symbol of wisdom learned in the quiet watches of grief. The warm stone, the enduring strength found in memory and unexpected companionship. The yew sprig with its single, resilient red berry, the eternal cycle of loss and rebirth. And her mother's letter, the bedrock of enduring love. She placed them carefully, reverently, around the base of the framed photo. A small altar, not to death, but to love's astonishing persistence. To the wild creatures, both literal and metaphorical, who guide us through our darkest woods. And to the quiet courage it takes to open the door, to sit patiently in the stillness, and tend the fragile embers, trusting they will, in time, light the way forward. Emma stood back, the late afternoon sun warming her face through the window. Outside, the first drip, drip, drip of melting snow echoed from the eaves. The deep freeze was breaking. The earth was stirring. Orion's season had passed. His promise, kept with majestic silence, had carried her through the harshest winter of her soul. He was part of the woods now, part of the mist, part of the enduring mystery of autumn's return. She missed the weight of his presence, the depth of his purr. But the space he left wasn't hollow. It was filled with gratitude, with the lessons of wild acceptance, and with the quiet pulse of a new connection, still small, still finding its feet. Amber eyes blinking slowly from a shelter blanket. Spring wasn't here yet, but its promise hung in the melting air. A promise of green, of renewal, of life stubbornly pushing through frozen ground. Just like love, just like hope, just like a tiny tortoiseshell cat, learning to believe in safety, one slow blink at a time. Emma placed a hand over her heart, feeling the solid warmth of the stone, the delicate brush of the feather against the letter, the enduring truth of her mother's words echoing within. My love for you is as constant as his autumn return, as enduring as these old trees, as vast and deep as the woods themselves. She smiled, real, kissful, wholehearted smile. The keeper of thresholds had crossed back into the mist, but he'd left the door wide open, not just to memories, but to the fragile, beautiful unfolding of what came next. And Emma, no longer untethered, no longer lost at the edge of the woods, was finally ready to walk through. Orange heart before you go. If this story of Orion, Emma, and the quiet magic of autumn touched something in your heart, please like this video. It lets us know these stories matter. Subscribe to the channel for more tales of hope, healing, and the extraordinary bonds we share with creatures great and small. New stories arrive like the changing seasons. Tell us in the comments below, where in the world are you listening from? Maplewood feels quieter without your voices. Share this with someone who understands the love of a loyal companion, or needs a reminder that even in the deepest winter, spring waits just beneath the surface. And tap the bell icon so you never miss our daily videos. We pour our hearts into these stories, and your presence here makes it all worthwhile. Thank you, truly, for walking this autumn path with Emma and her forest ghost. May you find your own Orion in the mist, and the courage to tend every fragile ember of hope. Until next time, be well.